I'm sitting with Pastor John Snyder at Crossroads Community Church here in Parker, and we're actually in your church, and I'm also a member of your church, and just love this place, John. So appreciate all that you do and the ministry that you bring to the church and the community at large here, and also your interest in QuietWaters and supporting ministries that support pastors. So appreciate you doing this interview today, and I just want to talk about sabbaticals.
Okay.
I know you had a sabbatical a while back, and how did you know it was time to take that sabbatical?
I've been in full-time ministry for, my goodness, 34 years now. And the first 7 years a youth pastor, the next 8 or 9 years a church planter, and then went into being a lead pastor. And the truth was, when I was younger, I just felt like you just keep going, you drive through. I ignored some of my own issues, and at the end of my time at the church plant, I went to the board and said, I feel like I have holes in my bucket and it's not staying full, it's emptying. Then I came to Crossroads, and I was a little older and a little wiser, and realized this is a marathon, and you've got to you got to pace yourself, and
Yes.
after a season of a marathon, you may need rest. So by God's grace, the sabbatical I had here was a planned preventative sabbatical instead of a urgent crisis sabbatical. And I could just tell I was getting weary. I'd been at the church over 7 years. Felt like I might even waited a little too long. But with the encouragement, real honestly, of a friend or two who know what pastors go through, they said, I think it'd be wise for you to go to your board and say, it'd be good for me to have a break.
Did your board embrace the idea, or were there any resistances to the idea?
There was resistance. The board members all have jobs, and none of them had jobs where after 6 or 7 years they got an extended break. They had a hard time understanding what that was and why I might need it. And as a result, I was not as aware of QuietWaters at the time, but I knew another man who helps pastors in these environments. He came in and sat down with the board and explained the need. I think 5, 6 years ago, you came into the board and said, let me help you understand. And I know I needed help, because otherwise it looked like I was blowing my own horn or trying to get time off. So to have experts who work with pastors come in and say, let me explain to you why this would be important, finally helped the board overcome their resistance.
Glad that worked out.
Yeah.
So when it came to plan the sabbatical, how did you plan yours, and what were some of the priorities?
I'm a little bit of a type A personality, so I put a plan together and then again passed it by, I believe it was you and my other friend Larry, and the feedback I got from both of you is you're supposed to be taking a break, not working, and you're going to work just as hard on your sabbatical as if you did here, just in different ways. And
Yeah.
so the truth was, I set aside a certain number of books I wanted to read. I set aside a time where my wife and I would go to a pastor and wife retreat together for a number of days. That helped pastors and wives kind of fine-tune things or recalibrate. I planned a time where I would meet with a couple of pastors, and I probably planned half of it just to relax, sleep in, play golf, be away. And it was 9 weeks, if I remember correctly, and I almost wonder if that was enough, but that was more than the church had ever done at the time. So.
But we talk about renewal and restoration, recharging. Those are often difficult to measure,
Yes.
kind of vague terms. But how was it renewing and restoring for you?
I remember when I preached my message and I knew I was starting a sabbatical the next day, I just totally relaxed, and it was completely different. I might take 2 weeks of vacation at a time. That's about as much as I usually do, but usually the first week it takes 3 or 4 days to ramp down, and then halfway through the second week I'm starting to try to ramp back up. And I walked out of the office, it was like, I don't have to be anywhere and I don't have to do anything for the next 8 or 9 weeks. No one's going to call me. And I had to give myself permission to do that. As I did that, I know in Psalm 23, David says, you restore my soul. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I do know that, as Jesus often slipped away to lonely places to pray, just pulling away, journaling when I felt like it, sleeping in if I felt like it, having recreation, sitting and letting others minister to me. It was a restoring time. I don't know if I can clarify how it was, but I did come back excited to be back and with energy going back into the job.
Sounds like too, there was a payoff for your marriage because you wanted to get away and do some marriage care and nurture that relationship.
Yeah, over half of the sabbatical, my wife and I were together, and then there was parts of it where I just went off and did a few things by myself, and she understood the importance of that too. But it was really good. It was important for her to be able to have her soul restored too. I mean, I'm up to my neck in ministry, and she watches it, and I come back after processing things, and she hasn't been able to process them. And so I realized my wife, her soul gets as weary or worn as mine does, even if she's not in the throes of it, because she cares about me.
Was there any downside to the whole experience?
I don't really think there was a huge downside. I do know that the church felt it was important to communicate the board with the church what I was doing and that I was coming back. And then the board had at the most 3 or 4 people who pushed back and said the same things they'd thought. I've worked for years at a job and I haven't got a 2-month break, and looks like he's just playing golf, and this seems like an excuse and to just get away and have fun. But that was pretty minimal. So when I came back from the sabbatical, I sat up on a stool in front of the church. I put up, I think it was 13 books I read. I briefly shared about the pastor and wife retreat that my wife and I went to. I thanked them and told them that I want to be as healthy and strong as I can be, that God even says every 6 days, the 7th day you ought to rest, and every 6-7 years it's wise to rest. And we got on the other side of it, and even though there's little flare-ups, the only pushback was people complaining. Those seemed to go away pretty quickly too.
Okay. Sounds like that feedback that you provided to the board was an important part of.
And it wasn't just the board. I shared with the board and then with the whole church what I felt had been beneficial.
Great.
The other part of it was I was the very first person on our staff to take a sabbatical, but because I did, by God's grace, it set a precedent. And since then, our high school pastor, they allowed him, I think, even a few more weeks than me on a sabbatical, and then our children's ministry director. They didn't see this as just a lead pastor thing. They said, we want to make sure. And so it's now kind of become a part of who we are as a church and taking care of our staff team.
And did that turn into a sabbatical policy, one that you hadn't had before?
We'd never had a sabbatical policy. I think they're still working on putting in clear words what the policy is, but it has at least become a recognized need for a staff member who's here 6 years or more.
What would you say to other Christian leaders that are having a difficult time embracing the concept of sabbatical, and board members that approve sabbaticals? What would your challenge or encouragement be to them?
We're in a war. We are in a war. And every person in the Bible I admire went through a wilderness experience where they were exhausted, they were weary, they wondered where God was, whether it was Elijah, who after a great success in ministry crashed and said, God, I just want to die, or whether it was Moses, who after a number of years leading the people said, if this is the way you're going to treat me, God, I just want to die. God told Elijah, take some time and rest. And the first thing I would say is the biggest problem for pastors, especially if you're a man, is we're men. We don't even know how we feel, and we don't want to admit we have weaknesses. And if Jesus often slipped away to lonely places to pray, and his ministry was only 3 years long, I would say 1, remember you're running a marathon. 2, seek to pace yourself. 3, take a sabbatical before it's a crisis, not after you've crashed.
Yes.
I tell a board, the health of the shepherd impacts the health of the flock. And while that summer I was on sabbatical, our attendance dropped significantly, but our offerings didn't, because the people who were committed to the church came and continued to give and kind of gave us a sense of who the core was. So don't worry. I mean, the big picture matters, and God can sustain his church. And if you're healthy, you can do a better job of helping your people be healthy and God's kingdom be furthered.
Thank you, John, for your comments and their reflection of paid the price in the trenches of ministry and, learning these lessons the hard way, but also trying to stay on the preventative side and take care of yourself along the way. And appreciate the time you took today. And
Well, thanks to QuietWaters for wanting to help pastors stay healthy and not fall into the traps we set for ourselves, as the enemy does, to make us collapse.